Hey guys, it's Tony and we're back on the bench. And this evening we're going to be doing a reassembly service, a reassembly walkthrough service on an accurate SR-20 twin spin. And as you can see, we've already taken this reel apart. I did that in the previous video, and you can check that out on the YouTube channel. And now we're ready for reassembly. So, this is a walkthrough, so I've already cleaned this reel, I've already lubed it up, but we're going to go through all those steps so that if you have this reel, or if you're thinking of picking up the reel, you'll know how this process works, and it'll help you determine whether or not you want to do it yourself, or if you want to have somebody else do it for that matter. So we're just going to talk a little bit about this. So Accurate is an American company. I want to give a big shout out to Matt Harper from Accurate. He gave me some tips and tricks on how to actually service this reel, and it was quite helpful. I do highly recommend getting the schematic diagram downloaded and printed out. Okay, as you can see, there's lots of pieces here to work with. It's actually 117 parts. Okay, and you can't lose any of them. So you got to make sure you have that. Okay, and I just happened to luck out, and I also have the user manual that came with the reel, and it's got a nice blow up diagram of the spool and the drag system here, so that's very helpful, and it talks about how that system works. Okay, but we've cleaned up all these parts, and we're ready for reassembly. So we're going to talk a little bit about the housing here first. All right, so there is a bearing down here. Make note, all the bearings in this reel do not need to be serviced, at least the ones that come with the reel. Okay, which these are all original, I'm pretty sure. They're all sealed, so you can't open them up or anything like that. But you do want to, clean them up, with some WD-40, and it doesn't hurt to just put a light film of oil around the outer ring, just to, make it so that it's easy to remove, when it's needed. Okay, and you can see, we've got some blue grease in here. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about here. So I'm using Penn Precision Blue Grease. I do believe at the factory they use Cal's Star Drag Grease for most of this stuff, and that's great too. I just happen to be using this, and it's always been a good product. So you want to grease up all this area here. Make sure that that bearing is resting down in there as such. Okay. So we're going to do that first. Okay. Quite a few steps in this process. Okay, so we've got this gear here. Okay, this cross gear. All right, and you want to make sure that this is all cleaned up. We've used brass wire brushes and toothbrushes and some WD-40 or even some degreaser. We've cleaned up all these teeth really well, and we're ready to put it back in. And we put it back in, of course, with some blue grease on there. And yes, there is such a thing as over-greasing. In this particular situation, I would recommend being somewhat liberal with the grease, just because of all the parts that are involved in this reel. It's not going to hurt, anything, especially if you're using the proper greases that are made for fishing reels. Okay, so we've got that gear back in place. Okay, and now we have our crosswind gear, and same deal here. Clean up all the teeth with the brass wire brush. There is a Teflon washer hiding under here, and there's also a bearing. It's hard to see, but it's in the center there. Okay, once again, these are not serviceable bearings. Okay, so that meshes down in there like that. All right, and then we've got a set screw that holds that back together in place, and that's just a number 2 Phillips. So we're gonna cinch that down gently like that. Okay, and that looks really nice like that. Okay, now you've got your main drive shaft. This is not designed to come apart from the block, okay? And that's a tricky thing to figure out, but you've got 2 roller bearings on either side of that block there, okay? And you want to make sure that those are on there and that they stay intact. And then you go back over all this with some blue grease. I've already done this, but I'm just kind of demonstrating for you how this works. Okay, now this piece has to go back through, and there's actually a kind of like a fiber grommet that's stuck in there, and you'll see it when I push this back up. Okay, you don't want to lose that. Okay. Yes, this is kind of a messy job the way that it works, and that's just something that you have to work with. Okay, but you need that grommet back down in position, like so. And you can kind of tap it down with the help of a screwdriver or something like that, and it's going to rest down in the base there. Okay, now we've got a bearing that rests on top of that. Okay, slide that in. And I did mention this in the disassembly video. You cannot get this main shaft out without taking all these parts out. You have to get everything out all the way down to this bearing, otherwise it will not come out. And that was one of the things I had to talk to the guys at Accurate about, is how to properly do that. And yes, you do need to take all these things apart. So, okay. So you set that down like that, and then that kind of holds that in place temporarily at least. Okay, now we're just kind of going back in the reverse order. Okay, so we've got a pinion gear. We've cleaned all this up with some WD-40, brass wire brush, toothbrushes, clean these teeth out really well. And then take that blue grease, okay, and you can put a little bit here on this bushing here because this is going to roll. Also make note that there are 2 thin shim washers at the top here, okay? And then this is your roller bearings in here. You just want to make sure that you clean all these up the best that you can, okay? And then there is a bearing resting on top that's a non-serviceable bearing, okay? And then all this is going to go back in as so, and it's going to look like that. And then we're going to go back, and then we got to get our holes lined up again. So you've got 4 holes up here. All right. It doesn't hurt just to take a little bit of real oil to these screw threads, either on the screws themselves or in the holes. I'm using Penn Precision oil for that. Real X oil is also equally as good. And we're going to go back in here, and we're going to take an Allen wrench. I did mention also in the disassembly video, you need a few special tools for this. Nothing too fancy, but you do need a few tools. So one of them is an Allen wrench. I don't recall exactly what size this is. It's a smaller American size. So if you have a set of standard American Allen wrenches nearby, that's what you're going to need to get these out. And we're going to just turn these up here gently, like so. This is a reel that takes time to work on. There's just a lot of pieces to get into, and you got to just take the time to do it right, basically. There's not a lot of room for error. It's a mechanical device, and you have to have all the pieces where they need to be. So, and we're just going to gently snug these up. You don't need to over tighten any of this stuff, okay? Okay. Now, we've got 2 other shim washers that go on top, like this. So you want to make sure you account for those. Now, at this point, it's not a bad idea to go back with a little bit of blue grease here at this part of the shaft, just a little bit. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay. Now, you've got these pieces here. So you've got a bearing, and then there's like a rubber washer that rests above that. Okay, so we're going to slide those back into position like so. Okay, now we've got our rotor assembly here that has to go back before we put our rotor nut back on. Okay, so we've inspected this, we've looked at it, we've cleaned it. We put a little bit of real oil on these seams here. Nothing wrong with that. There actually is a Teflon washer here, so that kind of self-lubricates on its own. Okay, and then, you know, you just want to make sure everything is nice and clean, and that's essentially all you can do here. Okay, there's nothing more to do. All right, and we'll go back. Like so. Rest that on top, and we'll get our rotor nut in place. And you're going to need a 14mm wrench, such as this, to gently tighten that up. You do not need to over tighten this, but just make it nice and snug. Okay. And then you have a set screw, really, really small one at that. And you need to pick one of these holes that it can go into. Accurate's been kind enough to give us 3 different options to choose from, which is quite helpful. And then you need a small Phillips to turn that screw thread. And don't forget to put just a little drop of oil on that. That's always a good thing. Now, before we get too far along, we've got this pin here that needs to go back through the main drive shaft and the world's tiniest little O-ring. Very, very small and very tricky to get back on here, actually. And you do not want to lose this, because I guarantee you it's so small you'll have a really hard time finding it. So you can see already how difficult this can be. Once you get it started, you should be able to slide it on, and then it'll lock in place. It'll set down in the groove, basically. All right, so I'm going to zoom in so you can actually see that. It's a little hard to see, but it's right there. Okay, so once you're done with that, ready for main gear. We've cleaned this up. Brass wire brush, toothbrushes, WD-40. Clean out all those gear teeth really, really well. And we go back with the blue grease, and we'll go back over the shaft. And again, I'm just kind of doing this for demonstration purposes here. I've already done all of this work, but that's what you would have there. And it doesn't hurt to put some on this side as well. Okay. And we slide that back down into position as such. Okay. You want to make sure that this is all meshed up just right. There we go. To verify that everything is meshing correctly, you should be able to just spin it, and you can see that crosswind block move up and down, and all those gears are turning. Okay, so that's a good deal. That's what we want to see. Okay, now we're ready to put our side plate back on. Again, you don't have to worry about the bearing. Just clean up the inside of the housing, and then we'll go back. And don't forget to hit those holes or these screws with a little bit of penetrating oil or some Real X or Penn Precision oil in this case. And granted, you don't have to take a reel apart all the time necessarily to give it proper maintenance, but you know, this is like, you know, a service interval. You know, like if you use the reel a lot, you know, yeah, maybe you should take it apart, you know, once every couple of years in its entirety, you know. But if not, you know, you definitely want to make sure that you hit certain lube points, you know, such as like the main gear and all those gears inside. You know, maybe take a look at some of the screw threads and make sure that they're not, you know, corroding or anything of that nature. Okay, now this is where you need a Torx driver. This is a T10, and that's what you're going to need to turn these threads here on the side plate. Great engineered equipment though, for sure. The way that it's been built, the materials it was built out of, it's solid. This is a solid reel. So snug these up gently, and then just give them a little extra 1/16 of a turn or so. Okay. You can see that's moving up and down real nicely, as it should. And we're just going to kind of go back with a little bit more blue grease here on the shaft, just for good measure, just to make sure all these parts stay nice and lubed on this thing here. Okay. Now, before we get into the rest of that part of the reel, we're going to come back here to the spool and the drag assembly. Okay, so we talked about this in the disassembly. We've got all these pieces and parts here. So we've got drag washers on both top and bottom here. We've cleaned all this up. We've cleaned these washers up. We've applied some Cal's Star Drag grease to the Carbon Tex fiber washer here. Okay, and then we go back with the metal washer. We've cleaned up our cap, and you just go back gently with this and just kind of press down gently, and you'll get a little snap in there like so, which is always good. Okay. Now, we have some other pieces and parts to account for. We've got our top drag washer stack here that we have to look at. Got some concave washers here. We got a nut. There's a couple of tiny screws for that. And then we've also got our drive shaft. So make note, there are shims here. They're too thin shims. You want to make sure that this is all cleaned up really well. Okay, and then just apply a light film of grease on here. I'm actually using Cal's Star Drag grease on this, just because it's so close to the drag washers. It makes sense to do that. Okay, and then you'll set this back in like so. It sticks out like that. All right, and then we've got carbon fiber washer, metal washer. And don't be afraid to take the 4-0 steel wool to this and clean this surface off and make it really nice and smooth. Okay, that goes back. Now make note, you've got the concave washers. You've got a thicker one at the bottom, and then the other two that kind of come together like a clamshell. Accurate's got a great video on this particular topic on how to disassemble this spool assembly. I highly recommend watching that. Okay, and then we're ready to put the nut back on. And then there's 2 screws there. Okay, and we're just going to apply that oil to those screws. And these are really, really small, guys, so be careful. You don't want to lose them. And then you need a really small Phillips to tighten these down. Do not over tighten these. You'll snap these heads off in a heartbeat. And this is basically just to prevent the nut from loosening up. This is not to torque anything down with per se. Okay, and then you've got this top piece here that threads on, top cap if you will. So you turn that like so. That should be all you have to do there. Okay, and we can set this back into position like so. And then you got your top cap here. Now make note, we talked about this earlier on in the last video. You have this wheel here in the center. Okay, and that wheel is basically that's a preset lock, as they call it, and that is to actually attach this cap to the top. Okay, you don't turn this whole lever here, you just turn this, all right, to attach it to the top, and then turn the wheel to adjust your drag. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, handle You just want to clean it up the best you can. Externally, this reel, didn't really need a lot of cleaning per se, because it's all made from stainless steel and aluminum parts pretty much. And so there's just not a lot of need for that. But we just thread this back on like so. Okay, and then we got our side cap. The threads back on like that. And there you have it. There is no anti-reverse on this reel. The only other thing I'd recommend you do is just do a little bead of reel oil here. Okay, spin that around. Okay. And drag, it's got a nice smooth drag system to it. Tighten that up, and that's working really well. Make sure you back off that drag when you're not using it. So there you have it. That's the Accurate SR-20 twin spin, all serviced and ready to go. So thanks again for watching. This is Tony with Back on the Bench. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please make sure you do subscribe. Hit the notification button. That way you will get all the updates as to when I have new videos coming out, and I've got quite a few more that are going to be coming up on the bench shortly. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.